we needed today to get ready for this. But we have another meeting following it, so we're going to try and kind of move through this. We have some new policies, so I'm excited to have some presentations on that. Just welcome to Joe Bowen, who's the new education reporter with the Duluth News Tribune. We look forward to teaching you a lot. Okay? Yeah.
We'll wait till the stories come out.
Yeah. Now keep in mind, you worked up in my neck of the woods at one time, so whatever that means, Joe. Okay, so our first item is a policy for first reading, and it's a tobacco-free environment policy, and this is replacing policy 1140. And again, this will be a policy that would be in the handbook. Assistant Superintendent Bonds, do you want to speak towards this a little bit? Or
at this moment, I'm going to turn it right away to our Director of Secondary, Mrs. Lawman.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us here today. I know we're starting with policy. I'm going to go through the policy, but I also want to preface, I guess, that this is stemming from a need for regulation that is tied to this policy that Vinnie Sequay and I are going to talk about in a little bit. Okay, so we had a project together that we've been doing for 5 years probably, and wanting to move it forward, we started looking like what would be the appropriate way to move it forward, and I had some ideas about that, and in doing some digging, was looking at our tobacco-free school district policy 1140. 1140 had been done in, well, it started adopted in 1987, and its latest revision was in 2013, so it's been quite a while since 1140 has been done. Some of the things that concerned me, I guess, about 1140 were things like, oh, we actually have city code in our policy. Do we know when city code gets updated? That was a concern right away to me, like if we're referencing city code, if they make a change but we're still referencing old code, that could be problematic for the district. And then another thing that when in looking at this in the tobacco-free policy when we were reviewing it, we noticed that they had enforcement procedures in there, which we really do handle in our student and family handbook that is sent out to students, and that gets updated every year. So things could be potentially changing in our student family handbook based on like newer procedures that we're doing with restorative practices that may or may not then be reflected in 1140. Also was looking to see where our legal references were with 1140 and thinking, you know, maybe we need to look at what MSBA has. So I set that one aside, thinking we needed to look and see what the newer policy was stating. So I pulled out 419 MSBA model policy, and you should have a copy of it there for you to review. When working through it, I saw that a lot of things were aligning very well to what we currently do in our practice. There are a couple of things that the school board would have to make a decision on, and I wanted to highlight those things so that there could be further conversation regarding that before we decide our final policy and what we're going to be doing. One of the other pieces that I wanted to point out about the MSBA policy is that there are some things that are in statute requirements that were not being addressed in 1140 that are addressed in here, and some of them are around vaping instruction for students, and so that is included in here, which is something that we know is a bigger issue now than it was 9 years ago with our students. And then we also had in here more more definition around vaping and the kinds of things that are used for vaping. Things change in almost a decade, so there's a lot more specifics about that and definitions that are in this policy. So if you take a look at this policy, what we're trying to do is maintain that learning and working environment that's tobacco-free in our district, which really does align with what we were doing before. One of the things that I want you to note, this is pretty standard of policy, but there is a piece in here that's not required by law. It's under section 2, section D, and it's language around accepting contributions or gifts, curriculum, materials from tobacco manufacturing companies. And so this is nothing that is required, and so it's one of these optional pieces that MSBA has put in here. But it is something for, I think, the board to mull over and make a determination if that language is something that you want in the policy moving forward, like how you want to address that and handle that. The other pieces in there, there's quite a few definitions. There's the piece in here about the vaping prevention instruction, and that is at least once by statute to grades 6 through 8. There is a section in a note as well. We could choose as a district, this is the other optional piece that I think that the board needs to consider. You could require more instruction in grades 9 through 12 or a peer-to-peer education program as well. That's what's written in here. In conversations with my curriculum team that I have, we felt like it's being addressed already in middle school and at the high school. Laura LaFontaine is our content specialist, and she is really well aware of what's going on in today's society, and there are lots of conversations around that. So we do know that it's already embedded in our 9 through 12 curriculum, and that one health course that those kids take, that they're required to take. I do not know, that we would have the, I don't know what the implications would be for a peer-to-peer education program. I don't know what we would need to do in order to pull that off, and there would be a cost associated. I have not vetted any of that part out. We are required by statute for just 6 to 8, and that would be my recommendation, is that we keep that part in, knowing that we also look at, current what's going on with our kids and addressing it, and we do have a unit on vaping at the high school as well. So that is MSBA Model Policy 419. I don't know if you have any questions or things that you want me to consider.
I'm glad that the vaping is heavily addressed. I know our athletic or our activity directors addressed it at their kickoff meetings a couple years ago, and had a speaker at their kickoff meeting. I'm referring to East, but I know it was going to be done at Dental. I was in person at the East one, and so that's been another avenue. And I would love to see it addressed in lots of different ways, but I'm glad you covered it with its own section in this policy. I have a couple other questions, but I'll just, Amber, did you have any particular question?
No, I don't have any super big questions, I guess. I just wanted to thank you for taking a look at this policy. I mean, that is a long time for it to not be reviewed, and like you said, things change so quickly. And so I think it's really important to kind of stay up on top of it and make sure that, we're addressing all of these things. Did you find in any, when you're talking about in section 2 of the general statement for D, the optional statement where the district will not solicit or accept any contributions or gifts, did you speak with MSBA about that, like why it's optional? Or?
No, I did not. I do know that there have been, over the past, I don't know how many years, decade probably, that accepting of gifts, has been a hot topic, which is probably why they have included it in here, but I did not speak with them directly. I do not believe, and maybe Kathy can confirm, that we probably are not accepting gifts or contributions from tobacco manufacturing companies. I don't know if they're coming and asking us to sponsor something, but
They have not.
they have not. And I don't know if that's addressed somewhere else in a different policy. I did not dig enough to find that out either, so.
Yeah, it seems like it would be, we wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But, it must be in another policy.
I don't know if it is in another policy.
Thank
I
you
didn't
for
dig
that.
to see that.
We'll look into that a little bit more, but thank you
Yeah.
for that.
I, just kind of back to the vaping piece again, and that notation that, we could require more, or create a peer-to-peer education program. I guess I'm interested, and we'll do a little research on what other school districts might be doing in that area. You know, we have, Essentia Health that has been doing a lot on vaping and has been a great resource, I know, to Principal Siebel, as she's gone on the circuit a little bit talking about vaping over the last couple of years, and so there might be some kind of programs that would be great community partners with some of our healthcare facilities. So I'm interested in exploring that one a little bit more. But I don't know if it needs to be in policy.
And that would be,
Yeah.
that would be where I would
Yeah.
caution, like, we can do more
Yeah,
anytime.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be in policy
Mhm.
to do more.
but I'd probably check also with, like I said, to see if other districts did keep that in, and check with NSBA to find out some of their rationale on that one, you know, in terms of encouraging or not encouraging it in. You mentioned kind of in your opening about regulation and city code. I think it was two different things you were referring to, but are there some additional things because of the city code that we need to be doing? Is that what you're gonna check on more, or what?
It would have all been covered. This was Duluth City Code from 2013. Again, I would, you know, what I thought was problematic was referring to city code in our policy, and if they're changing city code and making revisions and we're not doing it in the same time frame, that we might be having pieces that would be problematic for our policy. And so really what was in the Duluth City Code was that the smoking and use of tobacco under the age of 18 is prohibited, and then no person under 18 shall possess any tobacco or tobacco related devices on his or her person. That is the City Code from 2013. So I just felt like we might want to pull, when I was reviewing this for the regulation that we're going to talk about with Beniseque in a little bit, I felt like that led me to say we should really be looking at MSBA model policy instead of revising what we currently have in policy. That's where that decision and why I was looking at that piece.
Okay. Any other comments or questions, or?
No, I also appreciated that you kind of left it, open isn't the right word, but just kind of acknowledging that our student and family handbook changes each year, and that's revised, and so I appreciate that leaves room for how that changes and for restorative practices.
Yeah.
So,
There were some good things though in, well, there's always good things in old policy, but one of them was that it does reference our Minnesota statute regarding American Indians being able to have tobacco and to use it for ceremonial purposes. We captured that in the regulation as well. So just letting you know that we did carry over those pieces into the regulation, so.
thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, just want to make sure you're aware of that as well. There is the exception piece in the policy that also addresses that. We just kind of kept the same verbiage from our other policy when we had written the smudging regulation.
So this is a first reading, so we will have opportunity for the other board members to review it and talk about it at our the end of April school board meeting, and then at our policy committee meeting next month, we'll have a chance to review it and make any other changes if we want at that. So that will be where this will move. I'm wondering for process, if we're all okay jumping down then to number 4, where it's the informational on the regulations that Jen has mentioned, 419R. So
They are tied together.
we'll, everyone okay with that? Okay.
So there were several considerations, and I'll let Benisa Kwe talk about the background of this regulation and the need for this regulation. There were several considerations. I felt personally that it fit into the tobacco use. We also have a freedom of religion type of policy where it potentially could have had, but that was more problematic. We felt like this made more sense in the tobacco free. So we're tying it to the tobacco free one at this point in time. So what we're going to be presenting to you is a smudging and pipe ceremonies regulation 419R, which kind of ties into it. The reason why we're doing this as a regulation is that it's more about the procedures, it's more about how we notify staff when we're doing it, and also the responsibilities of certain individuals. And so it's more about the how versus having the policy. So I'm gonna let Benisa Kwe go ahead. I don't know if you have a copy or if you need mine. Go ahead and talk about it.
I have a draft that we'll draft off.
If I can just share as
Oh,
well
sure.
for just a moment, I just want to say thank you both for bringing forward this work. I think it's incredibly important. I know that we've had conversations in the past about misunderstandings related to smudging and just a general desire for the district to have understanding and acceptance and support for the activities that students and staff wish to engage in. And I appreciate you bringing this forward and helping us put it into formalized practice so that people aren't questioning things that really should be allowed.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I just wanted to be clear that this did go through facilities review, because I know there were some questions and concerns, and as I'm reading through it right now, there's some things that aren't in alignment with what we had originally talked about. So I'm just wondering if there's opportunity for us to continue to have that conversation about the different pieces. I know Dave Spooner had some correspondence via email and some other things, so I'm just hoping, because this is a regulation and not a board approved, that we can continue to have some dialogue and maybe do some minor adjustments, because it does look a little bit different than what Dave had shared with me about the conversations that we've had. So just want to make sure that we can continue to have some open dialogue about just some clarification on facility responsibilities.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's why we decided to put it as a regulation, because it is a file procedure. And as we are moving forward to make sure it does align, it would be nice that Jen and I are informed of these conversations, because we're the ones that are drafting this and writing it, so then we're able to make sure everything aligns correctly.
Yeah, this was conversations he had with you. So these were conversations he shared with me after having conversations.
And just to remind you, the last time we had a conversation about this was probably pre-COVID 3 years ago. And so
Yeah.
there's also that.
Yeah, so if we can circle back, that'd be awesome, just to make sure.
Definitely, we will. So like Jen was saying, looking at smudging and pipe ceremonies, putting it under the tobacco policy seemed like the best fit. Like she did say, there was, the freedom of religion, but for smudging, that's just a cultural practice. I wouldn't say it's our religion, so it just fits better under the tobacco policy. There we go. Now I can see. Most people need their glasses to see. I need to take mine off to see. So, so one of, as John said earlier, as a school district, we look at what are ways that we can be, warm and welcoming, inclusive, Looking at our data for American Indian students, you know, it is my job to make sure that I'm doing the best possible thing for our students in Duluth Public Schools. And if providing regulation under tobacco-free policy for them to be able to smudge and participate in cultural activities without being questioned about it, I think is a really good step forward. And so I appreciate the support that I've had over the years with previous administrators in moving this forward and us being able to pick it right back up. And I appreciate Jen, like, hey, let's do this, like, let's move it forward. And I thought, we should. So, you know, a part of wanting to make this a regulation, like I said, is just to make sure our students feel more welcome within Duluth Public Schools, and having the opportunity to feel engaged in a system that was not created for American Indian people. And so I feel like it's a step in the right direction for our students and for our families, because I think the overall feeling for our community, our American Indian community, is saying, hey, you all have this policy and now you have this regulation under the policy. You're really thinking about who we are as a community and welcoming us and being more inclusive. And to me, that's huge, considering I am a partial product of Duluth Public Schools. I was, you know, I'm a K-8 student, and I see the need for these things. You know, I'm pretty successful in my education career per se, to be able to be sitting here today looking at policies and regulations that affect my community. And I believe it's my responsibility and my job in this position to move these things forward. So, yeah, like, moving forward, we want to make sure that our procedures are very clear. We want to make sure that, you know, this is a regulation that will be pertaining beyond the walls of Masabi Condo Ojibwe Immersion Program, because that's where we are consistently smudging. But we want to make sure that our students, our over 500 American Indian students in Duluth Public Schools, have the opportunity and the right to do a cultural practice that helps them refocus. It helps them get ready for their school day. Maybe something comes up and they just, like I said, need to refocus, need to calm down and, you know, reset. That is the purpose of why we smudge. And so, you know, we talk about restorative practices, we talk about strategies to meet students where they're at, and I feel like this is definitely a strategy for us to really focus on it and put into regulation.
And for staff.
And
for
staff,
community
right.
events and people coming in, so it gives us that guidance for that. Yeah. One of the things that I just wanted to share also with the policy committee is in both of these, you know, we've been engaged in conversations about smudging and pipe ceremonies with Sabacon, with at the teacher level, with your staff that you have. We've engaged in that. But beyond that, we have, I've put both of these in front of the building principals to review at the secondary level. I have put this in front of TLE. I've had this put in front of cabinet. So this is not just, you know, Jen and Benisaqua working on these things in isolation. We've really tried to get it to different stakeholder groups so that people are looking at them and giving us feedback as we move things forward. So.
And I have shared this with our American Indian Parent Advisory Committee, and their response was, oh, you didn't forget about it. You're right, I didn't.
And I certainly know that you have been working on this for at least 5 years. I remember the early stages of this discussion. So I'm glad that you're bringing it forward. Something I always ask with many policies is, when you, as you've been creating this one, did you look at other districts' policies around this? Did we take any language from other district policies?
So I looked at a policy that was created at Central Lakes College. There are several people statewide that are my mentors in regards to some of our cultural practices, and one of them is Mary Sam, and she is the one that put a policy in place at the college. John shared one from Green Bay. I've asked statewide. People are telling me, once you get it put in place, can you share with me how you've done it? Because there isn't anything really set in stone, just statewide.
Okay.
It's allowed, but it's not like underneath a policy or a regulation, so I feel like this is, one of the firsts potentially.
Is
And
it
I think they get like pieces of it, like the exception here, and people might think that that's, okay, that's enough. You know, we wanted to make sure that we were following the statute, but then also giving parameters around it that were very specific to Duluth Public Schools and our needs.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, as you explained at the beginning, we do need clear procedures, both as a way for staff, but also the community to understand. And I'm just looking at the section on responsibilities of building administrators, engineers, and managers of facilities. And I imagine CFO Eric Singh, you were kind of referencing that particular section. And can you shed any more light on kind of what some of the...
Yeah, I think we just wanted a little bit more clarity on ventilation, announcement. I mean, there's different pieces of making sure. I think the original, and Anisquay, you can correct me, the original consideration was that there would be designated locations within spaces that the smudging could happen, but now this policy basically allows it anywhere, or this regulation. So I think that was a change in what had been initially kind of considered in those original parameters. So I think that's just what our facilities team just wants to understand more about. And so again, I think we were hoping that there was going to be a little more dialogue about that.
I hear what you're saying, and I remember the conversation. We did say that we wanted designated spots, and they would be, like, I have American Indian Homeschool Liaisons. They're district-wide, but there's only 4 of them. We can't be at all sites, so we choose sites for them to serve. We did have conversation years ago about having their offices be the designated spaces, but because of the growth and the way teachers and buildings are shifting, I said I can't make their offices a designated spot because from year to year, they're moved. They don't have a set office to go to every single year, so they're moved so often that I can't say room B24 is going to be the designated spot at Lowell because that's where the American Indian Homeschool Liaison is housed. The next year they could be down the Red Hall. So I didn't want it to be that detailed, but we also know, Dave and I had a conversation to kind of identify classrooms at different sites, and we even joked around saying we'll take a shell and some sage and test it out to see if the smoke alarm goes off. That never happened because COVID hit, you know, so there was a lot of different dialogue compared to what was here. But if we look at, you know, some of the classroom spaces, it's lined, you know, that we will utilize our current Massabiquan classroom spaces, and we did choose one classroom, has 2 windows, open the windows, close the door. We haven't had any no alarms have gone off. There was no safety issue. And then when we talk about pre-approved event spaces, we're talking about, you know, in the past pre-COVID, we've had like powwows or round dances, and usually we want to start that out with a smudge. We inform the building. So it's like those larger spaces that are you know, when we talk about the larger events, but it's still trying to identify some of the spaces within the sites, you know, which would be like the designated spaces. But I also know that we do have site principals that when the weather gets warm, they've given designated spaces outside, you know, like in their gardens or whatever they have in the school. So that's always nice and on their radar for them to say, you know what, this is going to be your spot anytime during the day, that if a student needs to go out to smudge, that's your designated spot outside. So, you know, it just is, it's really hard for us to pinpoint a permanent spot for smudging, considering how much my staff gets moved around and how classrooms, they grow, they shift, they get moved, you know, so I think the biggest part of our conversation that I had with Dave, I know a Dan Spooner, so I get the two mixed up. With Dave, is, you know, just making sure that the building is well ventilated, windows are open, doors are closed, administrators know what's going on, so they're not alarmed like, oh, something's on fire.
Yeah, you know, I'm glad it's in here, and I guess I just feel that it's clear as we can be, because really, in the end, David Spooner is responsible for our facilities, and I know that, you know, I want him to make sure that the process for informing our engineers, informing our building administrators is as clear as we can for all the safety reasons you covered and that are touched on in here. So I just hope you keep having conversations on this.
And for sure, I just want to share that it's more about not necessarily picking group numbers, but just that there's communication and if there's going to be a change. And so it's more just, thank you for saying that our teams know, and that if there are areas that do not seem safe, we just want there to be that communication. It just doesn't exactly spell out in the policy that there's communication and check in with the facilities person to make sure that that's a safe space. It kind of says anybody that wants to do it can do it. So we're just hoping for a little check-in or a little clarity that facilities would get.
Well, there's this piece about evaluating the fire and ventilation system in the requested space. So if somebody's making a request for a space, it has to run through administration, engineers, and managers, facilities first to make sure that's.
I think there was just a different section that said there wasn't a pre-requirement to do it without, and I think Dave's just asking for that consideration until we get a sense of where they are, and if there's specific designated spaces we know are safe, then we don't have to worry about going through the process every time. That was just, it's just some clarity things that's new for us, and making sure that Dave feels that we're in accordance with all those things. So nope, it's just making sure we just have that great communication. That's all.
And I feel like since we've brought this topic back up, the communication has been, it's been good. An example would be maybe a month ago at Bull, we got an email from Eve, who's the principal, saying, hey, they're doing some ventilation work in the school, please no smudging this week. And we're like, perfect.
Good
You know, so the communication is there, like they understand, you know, what is happening at that site, and because there was work being done, there was an email sent to all of us, and of course I get on my group chat, because not all my teachers might check their emails at the beginning of the day, so I'm like, hey, this email was sent out, no smudging, ventilation work's being done. They're like, all right, you know, thanks for the heads up, so. You know,
Has a fire alarm ever gone off? I'm just curious. It was touched on here too in terms of, and I'm just curious.
Not that,
Whenever I've been a part of a smudging, I've never had that happen, so yeah.
oh, not that I'm aware of, and I know at one point, a couple of years ago, we did a hand drum making session at ALC, and the gentleman that I had on contract, you know, he knew that we were okayed for smudging, and Adrian was there, and I told him, and you know, people smudge differently, you know, and he had like this shelf with a bunch of sage and a bunch of smoke, and I was like, you're gonna set off the fire alarm. So I closed the door, opened all the windows, and it still didn't go off, you know, because we were probably in a room that had really good ventilation, and you know, whatever, but I did go and apologize to Adrian. He said, I didn't even realize. He said it must have just went out the window and, you know, so I'm not aware of anything.
And for the sake of time, so we have, this is the first reading, and we understand there's some additional conversations that are needed regarding the actual,
Regulations is
Regulations.
informational, so this isn't, it's just informational.
absolutely.
I had a couple of things, if that's okay. So just thank you for all your thoughtfulness in writing this up. When you're talking about communication, like another side to that I think is really important is, you know, people should be able to smudge if they want to smudge. And, you know, just making sure that, I appreciate your communication with the principals and things like that so that they know, so that there's no, so it's reducing barriers so no one has a bad experience with smudging. And then, you know, so the other side of that. And then I just appreciated the 3 different aspects of individual workstations. So I read through that very carefully many times. Getting those pre-approved, that makes total sense to me. And then just leaving other options for the classroom spaces and the bigger events. So, yeah, thank you.
And the only other thing I would love to hear some more thoughts on at another time, but just what are the ways that we can help educate? You talked about how you've been educating staff and that, but how we can educate, you know, students and families so they better appreciate and understand and learn. And so I look forward to that being part of our discussion as this moves forward. So, okay. So, thank you.
Kim, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're going to table the 516 student medication policy. We're going to table that because we're going to have some additional conversations around that policy before. So that's 2B,
Okay.
516 student medication.
And then what about the other placeholder, the 800 series?
Ready.
Okay.
So there's 3 draft policies attached to board book. Thank you, Patty, for adding those in. They're also in your red folders. We are bringing forward 3. There's one additional, the 800 series is sites and buildings. So we had worked through some of the items that were MSBA recommended policies. So what you're gonna see today is almost in its entirety the MSBA version of the policy. I think it's been shared here at the policy committee and other committees that MSBA does the lion's share worth of work, and it's amazing what they offer in terms of not only the language, but the references and the cross-references and all of the legal pieces that go into it. So we were very much appreciative of the opportunity to bring forward items. In Duluth Public Schools policy, there isn't an old series that matches these. These just aren't anywhere. So we're adding these as an add-on, which to keep in mind, these are things that we've really been doing. They just haven't actually been in policy. So just, these are more clarity type of things. So hopefully that will kind of preface where we're gonna go. And because this is a first reading, you know, I won't go into a ton of detail and you didn't have it in advance, so you'll have some opportunity to read it, and other board members too if they have any questions. And then when we have the second reading, we can maybe have a more in-depth conversation. But just to briefly go through each of the policies we're bringing forward today. The first one is the equal access to school facilities policy. This is actually just a very straightforward, this is statute and federal, that students have the ability to have student-led meetings and opportunities in schools after the school day. So this is something that is in federal. You can see the legal references on page 3. And the only thing that we changed in the policy was that it was written that they needed to get approval from the principal to have the meeting. We changed it to community education because our community education manages all of the after-school activity reservations. So the only thing we referenced here differently was that someone who wants to have a student-led meeting at a school would need to reserve that through the community education department. So does that make sense to folks?
Yeah, that does, because I haven't read this, but, does it say any place in here about, if it's, another organization coming in, and leading it, that those leaders or advisors or whatever their title might be, have background checks?
There is not anything specific to background checks. These are not student activities. So these would just be someone reserving
Okay.
like a basketball tournament so these would just be regular opportunities to use those spaces.
Okay.
So you can see that that would not be outlined here. If you want to have that further discussion, we can certainly talk to MSBA, but that's not specifically related in this policy. Again, this would be something that is required. This is obviously the legal references, both federal and some Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I think were some legal things in Minnesota where they requested the use of facilities and can utilize those facilities in an after-school way and in equal access. One thing that when I was speaking with Dave Spooner is, and as our board and our administrative team know, that due to the pandemic and due to lack of staffing, sometimes we don't have our facilities available just because we don't have appropriate cleaning staff or supervisory staff in the building. So we would never be denying access to just one group. It would be that the building isn't available for any number of reasons. So we just want to be clear about that, that when this comes through, you know, if we don't have someone who can clean or supervise the space, we may turn down opportunities, but that it would be turned down for everyone, not just equal access to this, where it's and you can read the purpose. This would be for students. So keep in mind, this has got to be a student-driven meeting or organization who would be wanting to conduct a meeting for religious, political, or philosophical purposes during non-instructional time. So this would be the requirement that this would be after school, student-led, and outside of those parameters. So it's basically renting space inside of our school buildings.
Amber, did you have any questions on that? Even though we're gonna, again, you're gonna do just a
We'll
quick
do
overview.
it, yeah, and we'll have more dialogue, and certainly if anyone has any questions between now and the next meeting when we do the second reading, please reach out and we can provide some more follow-up. But again, this is basically word for word from MSBA, other than we did change the approval process going through community education versus a building principal.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Yep.
It's good to know, makes sense.
Yep.
Thanks.
One quick question.
Yeah.
And I know we'll go over them in greater detail, but policy 801, taking a look at section sorry, just
While he's looking,
the definition of secondary,
Section
Yep.
3B.
section 3B.
Yep, we changed that to secondary being our high schools. They had 7 through 12, but our middle schools are 6 through 12.
Right.
And so we took secondary to mean high schools for high school activities.
So I wonder if we want to change, since second, I'm just thinking that in our normal, like our nomenclature for the district, secondary schools would be middle and high school. So maybe we just change the wording in here to high schools.
We could change it to high school rather than secondary, for sure. Yep,
Not major.
that's a great suggestion.
CFO Erickson, it's helpful too when you're taking an NSBA policy and changing it
Yep.
to
To
highlight
redline
that
it.
so that
Yep.
we're aware which of the changes.
Absolutely.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Any other questions on 801? 802 is the disposition of obsolete equipment and material. Again, this is something we do on a regular basis, and we just discovered that we didn't have a policy related to that. So basically, we are taking the MSBA policy in its entirety, and just wanted to clarify that there was some additional language in 2019 related to surplus computers. So this is relatively new in 2019 from the original policy that MSBA created. This is in For clarification related to obsolete equipment, especially maybe larger pieces of equipment, buildings, for example, that there is a policy that if there's things that have a large value, we should be putting those out for bid versus just giving them away or disposing of them. Things that have little or no value, we have just a disposal process. And then keeping in mind that by the time we're probably looking to dispose of something, they really don't have a ton of value to us anymore, but just clarifying that. And our expectation, and I know we've had over the past several years, smaller auctions to get rid of excess desks and bookshelves and other things, and if you've ever participated in those, we're lucky to get $1 for things versus a high level of, or high amounts, and we just really haven't had the opportunity to sell high value products here in the district because we get useful life out of everything we buy here at Duluth Public Schools. And again, happy to have more conversation with folks at the second reading, but again, this is something we have in practice already. This is just putting it in policy, and this is in its entirety the MSBA policy.
Okay, and then
The final one we had was draft policy 807. This is the health and safety policy. Once again, this is something we do and provide every year, but again, we do not have a specific policy in our current policy manual related to health and safety. Again, this is taking this policy in its entirety. One thing that Dave Spooner did want me to share with board members and our administration is that some of the items for programs and plans are in progress or in process. So just like we have many other policies where we're working through those, just wanted to make sure that folks are aware that some of our current programming may be being updated or in progress or process of improving, so at any one time. But all of these areas, we continue to do these things. The district is required, obviously, to have certain things related to health and safety. We also have the financial piece that's related to the health and safety levy. Dave Spooner provides the annual long-term facilities maintenance report every year. He provides the monthly health and safety reports. So all of those things are in practice. We're just putting the policy number to the actions we are doing. There is only one other policy in the 800 series that's a recommendation from MSPA that we're not bringing forward yet, which is the recycling policy. Our team had taken a quick look at it and felt like we needed some more discussion. There was a couple items that they felt needed some clarification from MSBA just so that they felt they understood it better. Not that they really had any issue with the policy, but they just wanted to reach out to make sure they understood how we've done some recycling in the past. We wanted to know if we should add that in because it wasn't specified in the policy, but things that we do that are in alignment with what it says, it's just not specifically worded in there, so we were just gonna check with them. So that will come next month.
okay, excellent. Thank you, Kathy. Any other questions, Amber?
Just a quick question on 802. Is this in any way connected to your depreciation schedule at all?
It can be.
Yeah.
So we do have an annual fixed asset and depreciation models that we do for the annual audit. So as we do dispose of items, we have a threshold of over $5,000. So anything that's less than $5,000 in value that we would dispose of would not be a part of our depreciation schedule. So it would only be large scale items.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Okay, then the last thing, we kind of moved around a little bit, but is the policy for our second reading will be the Duluth Public Schools website accessibility policy, and Jason Crane was here last month and touched on that as well and gave some background. Is there anything in addition on that policy, Jason?
Nope, no other considerations. It's think it's ready to go.
And I was just looking at my notes from last month too, to see if.
If you got any questions, I'll answer.
I didn't have any follow-up questions from last time, but I appreciate that you were here last time and explained
Yeah.
the process.
Good to see you all again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crane.
So that one, that policy then will be on the August, I'm already into August.
Well, don't skip July.
Yeah, the April board meeting, and then it'll be in the consent agenda, but it would pass then at the second reading if all board members approve it, so. Okay, so we are done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.